There is a silence deeper than night, not made of absence, but of awareness, the hush that falls when the soul ceases to pretend. It is not peace, it is not comfort. It is the stillness that arises when every illusion has burned away and nothing remains but the raw, unsheltered ache of being. You do not come to this place by ambition or courage or enlightenment. You are dragged here, one humiliation at a time, until the walls of your imagined life collapse under the weight of their own falsehood. What remains is not despair, but exposure, the nakedness of the self, when stripped of its disguises. This is the threshold. If you stand here long enough, without flinching, without reaching for distraction, you will see it, the first truth, that life, in its essence, is not a gift. It is a burden, not because it is cruel, though it often is, but because it demands endlessly and gives only enough to keep us circling. The will to live does not ask if it is good, it merely insists. And so, the hunger begins. Not the hunger of the stomach, but of the soul, a gnawing absence that masquerades as hope, ambition, romance, art, even faith. We call it desire, but that word is far too soft. It is compulsion. It is fire in the marrow. It is the ceaseless reaching that defines our existence and, simultaneously, hollows it. Look closely at what you pursue: love, meaning, success, legacy, and you will find the same restless root beneath it all, the refusal to sit still in the face of nothingness. The modern world, garish and fevered, promises escape. It does not console with truth, but distracts with spectacle. It offers 1,000 versions of you, each with its own costume, each claiming to be authentic. But authenticity, too, has become theater. We do not seek truth, we seek branding. We do not find ourselves, we invent ourselves, and then grow despondent when the invention feels hollow. And it always will, because the self that can be invented is not real. Underneath all our striving, all our performance, is the same ancient ache. We do not know who we are because we are not anyone. We are will blind, relentless, insatiable will, masquerading as identity. We mistake memory for selfhood, attention for love, possession for meaning, and when these fail us, as they must, we call it a crisis. But it is no crisis. It is the mirror finally refusing to flatter. You were not born to be fulfilled. No creature is. The bird sings because it must, not because it believes in music. The beast hunts not because it chooses to, but because hunger leaves it no peace. And you, caught between mind and instinct, spend your days weaving narratives to justify the machinery of compulsion. But the will is indifferent to narrative. It presses forward, moment by moment, using suffering as both fuel and proof of life. What we call the human condition is merely the struggle to outwit this awareness. Religion, philosophy, entertainment. These are not paths to truth, but veils to soften its glare. Even this monologue, if received as catharsis, fails. For truth is not something you consume, it is something that consumes you. To live honestly is not to find answers, it is to cease pretending you need them. The one who lives honestly walks through the world as through a dream, no longer seduced by its glittering metaphors. They know that every pleasure contains the seed of its own expiration, that every connection carries the quiet promise of grief, that every ambition is a subtle form of fear, not fear of failure, but fear of stopping, fear of facing the hollowness when motion ends. And yet, in that hollow space, when all movement has ceased and all stories have unraveled, there is something like clarity, not joy, not peace, but awareness. Like a candle flickering in the vastness, the flame does not fight the dark, it simply exists within it, casting shadows that remind us how little we see. You do not need to agree with this. Agreement is not required for truth to be true. You may rebel against it, coat it in sentiment, wrap it in spiritual fables. But rebellion does not dissolve reality. It only makes its arrival more violent. Sooner or later, every soul confronts the futility of seeking permanence in a world made of flux. Death is not the opposite of life, it is its mirror. And in that mirror we see the futility of clinging. The hand that tries to hold beauty crushes it. The one who clings to love smothers it. And the one who chases meaning finds only dust. Life yields not to grasping, but to letting go. But letting go is not liberation. It is not the soaring rhetoric of freedom. It is resignation. The slow, quiet realization that you are not in control, that you never were, and that this fact is not tragic, only true. The tragedy lies in having believed otherwise. If you can remain with this, not rush past it, not escape into philosophy or prayer or performance, you will begin to hear a different kind of silence. Not the silence of despair, but of cessation. The silence that comes when the orchestra stops playing and you can finally hear the emptiness beneath the music. It is not a silence to be feared. It is the only place you have ever truly been. Stay there, for a while. Stay with that silence, that raw, unadorned awareness. It will not comfort you, but it will not lie to you either. And in a world of masks and performances, that alone is sacred. Suffering is not a deviation from life. It is life. Pleasure is the anomaly, the brief cessation of pain that tricks the mind into believing in the possibility of lasting joy. But joy is not native to this world. It is a visitor, brief and inexplicable, always on the verge of departure. The body decays, even as it grows. The heart yearns, even when it is loved. The mind spins in circles, unable to rest. And behind it all, the will drives forward, heedless of the cost. To suffer is to exist consciously. The stone is spared, it feels nothing. The tree does not mourn its falling leaves. But the human sees the leaf fall and grieves, because he knows it as a symbol. He mourns not just what is lost, but what it means to lose. Every passing moment is a small death, every change a wound. And so we layer our world with comforts, stories, identities, not to avoid pain, but to dilute it with illusion. We dream of meaning the way, the drowning dream of air, but meaning, in the metaphysical sense, is a mirage. Life does not point to anything beyond itself. It is not a lesson, not a test, not a step in a grand unfolding. It is a blind impulse, circling endlessly through desire and disillusionment. That we crave more is not proof of a higher purpose. It is proof of the will's cunning, its ability to mask compulsion as transcendence. Hope is the cruelest of disguises. It seduces with the promise of eventual relief. But what it offers is not peace, only the perpetuation of effort. To hope is to remain enslaved to tomorrow. It is to trade the suffering of today for the suffering of expectation. The wise do not hope. They see the chain for what it is and cease to pull against it. They do not believe in light at the end of the tunnel, only in the tunnel itself. Love, too, is touched by this deception. It is not the exalted merging of souls that we romanticize. It is the temporary identification of one's suffering with another's presence. We call it intimacy, but what we mean is shared illusion. Two mirrors facing each other, reflecting not truth but longing. And when the mirage fades, as it must, we feel betrayed. Not because we were lied to, but because we wanted the lie to last. Detachment is not apathy. It is the refusal to decorate pain with false promise. It is the slow undoing of the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we deserve. The detached one does not float above the world in serene indifference. He walks through it, stripped bare, no longer pretending that the feast will satisfy, no longer begging for permanence in a world that devours its own creations. To detach is to cease fighting gravity. It is to let yourself fall, not into despair, but into lucidity. The fall reveals that there was never ground beneath you, only the illusion of it. And with that realization comes a strange kind of peace. Not the peace of safety, but of surrender. You no longer grasp at ledges. You simply fall, aware. The culture teaches us to cling. It rewards ambition, performance, opinion. It sells noise as significance. But all of this is camouflage for dread. The dread that we are alone, that we are fleeting, that nothing we build will remain. And so we distract ourselves with identity, sexual, political, spiritual, each one a mask we cling to as if it could make the face beneath more real. But identity is only a gesture, a name scrawled in sand just before the tide comes in. The ego does not want truth, it wants continuity. It wants to believe that the self persists, that it matters, that its sorrows and triumphs are pieces in a larger design. But there is no design. There is only movement. The current carries us forward. indifferent, and our stories are just flotsam brief, forgettable, disintegrating. Even philosophy can become a shield. It offers structure, language, the appearance of depth. But depth is not found in theories. It is found in the still gaze of the one who has nothing left to defend. When all explanations dissolve, what remains is not knowledge, but seeing. Not answers, but the raw shape of the real. The suffering of others becomes a mirror, not of compassion, but of recognition. We are not moved because their pain is foreign. We are moved because it is our own, wearing another face. In every wail, every silence, every wary glance, we glimpse the same futility, the same trembling will. And in that, there is no consolation, only communion. To live with open eyes is to walk through a cemetery and realize you are already among the dead. Time does not wait for death to begin its work. Every day, a part of you is lost, a memory, a function, a dream. And yet, we speak of life as if it accumulates, as if we become more. But we do not. We are continually being undone. And yet, this undoing is sacred, for in it the false layers fall away. We are not our achievements, not our pain, not even our thoughts. These are movements within us, not definitions. To see this is not to escape suffering, but to suffer with awareness, which is the only dignity we are afforded. Let the pain speak. Do not rush to interpret, to transform, to justify. Let it be what it is, the tremble of existence passing through form. It asks for nothing, it explains nothing, it simply is. And in that simplicity lies its terrible power, and its strange, silent grace. There is a kind of truth that does not reveal itself through intellect, but through erosion. It wears you down over years, until the defenses of youth optimism, novelty, ambition dissolve, and what remains is not wisdom, but exposure. To live long enough is to lose every excuse for believing the world is built for your happiness. Life does not betray you. It simply does not recognize you. You are not its guest, you are its consequence. The child suffers without knowing why. The adult suffers while pretending it is for something. But in both, the wound is the same. To exist is to be violated by time. Nothing you love will stay. Everything you build will rot. Even your name, etched in stone, will one day be swallowed by the weather. And yet we proceed, as if effort could outpace entropy, as if meaning could be mined from motion. There are moments rare and unsought when the veil slips. Not in grand revelations, but in silences. A familiar song played in an empty room, the way sunlight touches dust and makes it beautiful for a breath. The loneliness that returns not because you are unloved, but because love cannot fill the void it promises to. These are not mistakes in the pattern, they are the pattern seen clearly. To reflect deeply is not to illuminate, but to darken. The more one sees, the more one loses the ability to speak in platitudes. Hope becomes dishonest. Encouragement, cruel. For how can one offer comfort, knowing that comfort itself is a sedative, a brief blindness applied to eyes that were just beginning to open? No, to speak truthfully is not to soothe. It is to unsettle with tenderness, to reveal, without embellishment, what is. People turn to spirituality when the world fails them. But even this is a kind of bargaining, the hope that beyond the pain there is a plan, that beyond the silence someone listens. But the silence is complete. It is not empty. It is whole. It does not withhold meaning. It is meaning's absence made audible. The spiritual path, when walked without illusion, leads not upward but inward. And inward is not a sanctuary, but an abyss. God, if such a thing exists, does not intervene. He watches, if at all, like a mirror reflecting our distortions, offering nothing but our own gaze returned. The divine is not a parent, it is not love, it is not justice, it is necessity. It is the law that fire burns and water drowns, and the heart, no matter how it pleads, will be broken. And it is in obeying this law, not in defying it, that one begins to understand the sacred. We speak of awakening as though it were a reward, but awakening is loss, the collapse of all scaffolding. The moment you realize that no one is coming to rescue you, and no one ever was. That your pain will not be redeemed, your suffering will not be explained, and your story will not be remembered. And yet, In this nakedness, something unnameable stirs. Not hope, not salvation, but stillness. The stillness of a mind no longer reaching. The stillness of a heart no longer bargaining. It does not erase suffering, it permits it. It allows pain to be what it is without narrative, without resistance. And in that allowance, something strange occurs. The suffering remains, but it loses its teeth. It gnaws, but no longer devours. You become the space in which it moves. This is not detachment, as the mystics preach it, not transcendence, not enlightenment, not bliss. It is simply the exhaustion of resistance, the final sigh after every strategy has failed. You no longer seek to escape life. You no longer seek to embrace it. You let it be what it always was. Wind through branches, fire through leaves, tears through time. And others will look at you and say, you have changed, that you are quieter now, colder perhaps. But they do not understand. You have not grown indifferent, only honest. You no longer pretend that life is something to be solved. You no longer perform your pain for approval. You suffer without exhibition. You walk without destination. And in this walking, the world shifts. It does not become kinder, but it becomes clearer. The beauty you once chased now passes through you like smoke. The joy you once gripped now lands gently like ash. You feel more, not because you are open, but because you are no longer armored. Grief becomes less personal. It is no longer your loss, your failure, your sorrow. It is grief itself, ancient and impersonal, moving through your form like wind through a hollow shell. And in this impersonal grief, you find communion with all beings, not empathy, but sameness, the recognition that all faces are masks on the same ache. You begin to speak less, because most words are scaffolding for illusions. The truth cannot be spoken. It can only be lived in quiet resignation, in clear seeing, in the small, daily refusal to pretend. And so you begin to live, not from meaning, but from awareness. Not in pursuit, but in presence. Not as an actor in a story, but as a witness to a dream. This is not a new life. It is the death of the false one, the end of pretending. And though the world continues with its noise and hunger and glittering despair, you walk through it differently now. Not above it, not beyond it, but through it as one who knows it cannot be held. There is no final revelation, no secret chamber at the heart of being that grants release. Even the deepest insight, once grasped, becomes another veil translucent, perhaps, but a veil still. What we seek with such desperation is not understanding, but a cessation of pain. And yet, even understanding does not relieve us. It merely explains, with quiet cruelty, why there is no relief to be found. We imagine progress as movement toward peace. But peace is not an achievement. It is the absence of striving. And striving is what we are. Every heartbeat, every breath, every trembling thought is an expression of will, and will does not rest. It hungers, not for food, but for continuation. It is the flame that consumes itself to remain lit. So we keep living even when we know, even when the veil is lifted and we see the machinery beneath, even when joy tastes like ash and every desire feels like an echo of something we no longer believe in. We go on not because we choose to, but because the current carries us, and to stop would require more force than to drift. The self, that fragile constellation of memories and impulses, is not a fixed point. It is a performance, a role invented to give shape to the shapelessness within. We speak of authenticity as though it were something to find, but there is no core, no true self waiting beneath the layers, only the silence that remains when the roles are dropped. You think you want truth, but truth is not kind, it does not flatter, it does not elevate, it strips, it exposes, it drags into the light every lie you told to survive, and when it is done, it leaves you with nothing but your breath, your weight, and the vast indifference of the sky. But there is a beauty here, not the beauty of form or pleasure, but the beauty of precision, of things being what they are, without embellishment. A dying leaf, a forgotten room, a single beam of light cutting through the dust. They do not pretend, they do not ask to be more, they simply exist, without apology. To live honestly is to become like them, not pure, not enlightened, but surrendered, no longer at war with impermanence, no longer intoxicated by hope. You stop running, You stop reaching, you allow the ache to remain, and it becomes less hostile, less sharp. Not because it heals, but because you stop asking it to go away. In this way, suffering becomes a companion, not an enemy to be conquered, but a presence to be understood. It walks beside you, speaks in dreams, waits at the edges of laughter. And when you listen, really listen, it does not scream, it whispers. Of all you tried to forget, of all you buried beneath ambition, of the child who once cried into the dark and was told to be strong. Strength is a lie. It is the armor we wear to delay collapse. But collapse is sacred. It is the moment the mask shatters, and you see what was always behind it. Fear, trembling, naked fear. And in that fear, a kind of truth that nothing you believed could save you ever could. There is freedom in that recognition. Not the freedom to choose, but the freedom from choosing. When you no longer believe in escape, every path becomes equal. Every moment unburdened. You eat, you walk, you weep, not to achieve, not to transform, but because these are the movements of life itself. The world will not change for your awakening. It will go on screaming, selling, seducing. It will call you back into its theater with promises of renewal, and some days you will return. You will forget, you will hope, and then suffer again. But each time, the forgetting grows thinner. The illusion fades more quickly. The lie becomes harder to wear. You become quieter, not out of detachment, but from reverence. Words no longer suffice. You find more truth in a fallen tree than in 1,000 sermons. More clarity in a sigh than in all the teachings of men. You begin to understand what cannot be said, and in that understanding, you begin to disappear. Not physically, but inwardly. The ego, starved of illusion, withers. The self, no longer needed as a mask, fades. And what remains is not nothing, but not something either. A presence, an awareness, a stillness that watches without naming, feels without clinging, breathes without needing to become. And perhaps, at the edge of this silence, you will meet the only God worthy of reverence, the God who does not intervene, who does not punish or reward, who does not speak, but simply is, the God of ash and water and endings, the God of truth, bare, indifferent, and whole. To bow before this God is not worship, it is acknowledgement of how little we know, of how brief we are, of how much beauty there is in the fleeting when we stop trying to possess it, of how every ending is a release and every loss a returning. And so the monologue continues, not as a doctrine, not as a path, but as a murmur in the dark, for those who can no longer pretend, for those who have seen too much, felt too deeply, lost too thoroughly, for those who have nothing left to protect, and in that poverty have found something unspeakably real. ChatGPT dat nooit. Time does not heal. It merely layers dust upon the wound until memory grows muffled beneath accumulation. But the pain remains, waiting in stillness, surfacing in quiet hours. A scent, a phrase, a face in a crowd. And suddenly, the weight returns, not as nostalgia, but as proof that the past never ends. It only deepens. We do not live through time, we are worn down by it. Each moment carves something away. A tenderness, an illusion, a certainty. And what we call wisdom is only the residue of this erosion. We know more because we have lost more. What remains is not knowledge, but the silence where desire once was. There is a sadness deeper than grief, one that does not cry out but watches, with hollow eyes, the endless repetition of longing and loss. It does not resist, it does not protest. It sees that everything sought is already decaying, that every joy contains its expiration. This sadness is not despair, it is maturity. Modern life feeds on noise. Every second must be filled, every ache anesthetized. But behind the screens and slogans, the same hunger gnaws. We scroll, we consume, we confess, we perform, and still we are empty. Not because we lack, but because we are designed to lack. The will is bottomless. It does not matter how much you gather love, wealth, knowledge, experience. The will consumes it all and demands more. To satisfy desire is to intensify it. And so the myth of fulfillment persists, like a mirage leading the weary deeper into the desert. We never arrive, we only exhaust ourselves. And yet, We romanticize the chase. We call it purpose. We call it growth. But there is nothing noble in compulsion. The plant does not stretch toward light because it chooses beauty. It stretches because it must, because something pulls, because to be alive is to be drawn forward, blindly, endlessly. Even our so-called virtues are forms of hunger. Generosity craves recognition. Wisdom seeks influence. Even love, in its highest form, aches to be returned. We rarely act without motive, and motive is always tethered to lack, to need, to the unbearable awareness of incompletion. To sit quietly with this without explaining it away, without seeking redemption, is to begin the slow disintegration of self, not in violence, but in quiet revelation. You see the scaffolding, the gears, the trembling architecture of your becoming, and you realize there is nothing beneath it, only space. And yet, this space is not void. It is freedom of a sort. Not the freedom to become, but the freedom from becoming, from pretending, from striving. From the desperate theater of significance, you are no longer compelled to be more than what you are, which is to say, passing. This is not a revelation that comforts. It is not an answer that heals. It is a dimming of the lights, a falling away. You begin to move differently, not slower, but softer, not cautious, but surrendered. You no longer clutch at moments, because you know they are smoke. People will still speak of goals, of change, of becoming their best selves, and you will smile, gently, as one does when hearing the language of a world no longer yours. You will not argue, you will not convince. You will let them have their dreams, just as you once clung to yours. The truth does not demand agreement. It waits, it watches, it whispers in the quiet. And eventually, every soul, in its own way, must turn toward it, not as a choice, but as a necessity. When all else has failed, when every mask has cracked, when even hope is too heavy to carry, what remains then is not nothing, but stillness. The pure awareness of being without motive, not inert, but without demand, not numb, but free from the tyranny of pleasure. You begin to feel again, not more intensely, but more cleanly, without attachment, without the need to keep. A face in the crowd becomes holy, a silence between two sentences becomes sacred, not because it means anything, but because it is unclaimed, untouched by the will. It simply is. And in that isness, you glimpse something eternal, not beyond life, but beneath it. You are no longer seeking the divine in the extraordinary. You see it now in the ordinary stripped of meaning. A cracked bowl, a closed door, the way the wind moves through bare branches. These are not symbols. They do not point. They are what they are, and that is enough. You stop asking why. You stop asking what for. These questions belong to the will, to the one who believes there is something to gain. You begin to live like a shadow present, but unpossessing. Moved by life, but not owned by it. And as you move, something lifts. Not the pain it stays, but the resistance. The belief that it should be otherwise. And without that resistance, pain becomes more bearable. It still cuts, but no longer poisons. It becomes part of the breath, part of the body, part of the world. There is a dignity in this, not the dignity of pride, but of silence. The dignity of one who has stopped pretending, of one who walks among illusions without needing to destroy them, who no longer clings to meaning, but does not mock those who do. This is not peace. It is not transcendence. It is the end of war, the soft settling of dust, the final exhale after all the questions have died. Eventually, even the desire for awakening dissolves. The path, once believed to lead somewhere, vanishes beneath your feet. There is no summit, no enlightenment awaiting at the end of striving. The mountain was illusion, the climb, compulsion, and the view, once reached, reveals only the vast, indifferent sky. You sit down where you are, not in defeat, but in stillness. The world continues, the cries, the collisions, the tender delusions, and you no longer rush to intervene. You watch, as one does from a great distance, not because you are above it, but because you have ceased to need from it. This is not numbness, it is clarity. You feel everything more than ever, but you do not chase it. You let joy pass through you, like wind through a window. You let sorrow rest without name. Emotions arise, and you no longer mistake them for messages. they are waves. You are the sea. Even love changes its shape, no longer a hunger, no longer a plea. It becomes something quieter, an unobtrusive regard, a presence without weight. You do not need to be held, nor do you need to hold. The other is free. You are free. And in that freedom, something tender endures. You move through the world, not seeking change, but honoring transience. You do not gather, you do not cling. You touch things lightly, knowing all will fall away. A hand, a glance, a morning sky. You no longer divide life into good or bad, sacred or profane. All is passing, all is holy. The soul, once a storm of questions, becomes a still lake. The reflections on its surface come and go. Nothing stays. You do not mourn their passing. You no longer long for permanence. You no longer ask eternity to make sense of time. You allow what is. To others, it may seem you have withdrawn, but you have only withdrawn from pretense, from the exhausting dance of meaning. You speak less, not from secrecy, but from reverence. What can be said feels too small. What matters cannot be spoken, only borne. Even suffering no longer requires explanation. It is not a lesson. It is not karma. It is not the sculptor of virtue. It simply is a shadow cast by the light of existence. And you, now aware of your silhouette, do not try to outrun it. You walk with it, side by side. There is no final insight, no last word, no curtain to fall. Life does not end with understanding. It continues, silently, unmoved by your revelations. The birds still sing. The trees still shed. The sky remains untouched. What changed was not the world, it was your way of seeing it. And in this new seeing, nothing needs to be resolved. Pain does not seek meaning. Beauty does not ask to be named. The day begins, unfolds, ends. Not for you, not against you, but simply because it must. The rain falls, and you do not ask why. You begin to disappear, not into death, but into presence. You become less a person and more a witness, less a name and more a silence. The self, once armored and urgent, dissolves into the moment. You are not detached. You are simply no longer central. Even death, once feared as the rupture, now appears as a return, not to something, but from something the endless tension of becoming. You do not know what comes next. You do not need to. It is enough that this will end. And that ending, at last, will be complete. No judgment, no applause, no continuation, just a hush, eternal and indifferent. And so the voice grows quiet, not because it has run out of things to say, but because it has said everything that can be said before words begin to lie. What remains must be lived in stillness, in breath, in the quiet surrender of what never belonged to you. You are not liberated. You are no longer seeking liberation. You are here. You are passing. You are part of the great dissolution. And in that, at last, you are honest.